My parents said I was their biggest disappointment, but they changed their tone the moment my baby's father showed up in his convoy of black SUV. Stick with me while I share my story. If it moves you, please support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing it with people you care about. I was just 20 when my life completely fell apart. I grew up in a small town in Oklahoma, quiet and careful, always trying to do the right thing. But when I found out I was pregnant, everything changed. My parents, Wes and Marla Cole, had always been strict and proud. My dad, a retired sheriff, expected obedience, while my mom cared more about appearances than anything else. They had high hopes for me, but as soon as they learned I was going to have a baby at 20, all that love vanished. I still remember the night it happened. I came home to tell them, hoping for support, maybe even a little understanding. Instead, my father stared at me with cold eyes and said, "You've brought shame on this family." My mother didn't even look up from her perfectly arranged tea set. "You're a stain, Raina," she said, voice steady but cruel. "If you stay, you'll ruin everything we've built." They didn't just criticize me, they kicked me out. I had no savings, no plan. The town that once felt safe suddenly seemed huge and empty. I packed a small bag, trying not to cry, and found a tiny, rundown rental house on the edge of town. It smelled like damp wood and old carpets, but it was mine. For the first time, I had to face the reality that I would raise my baby alone. The first weeks were the hardest. I was exhausted, scared, and often hungry. I had no family support. Phone calls to my father went unanswered, and letters from my mother were filled with instructions to give the baby up if I wanted any chance of returning home. I spent hours sitting on the floor of my little kitchen, tracing patterns on the worn tiles, trying to plan a future that seemed impossible. But even in my heartbreak, something inside me refused to break. I cleaned the house as best I could, patched up holes in the walls, and started thinking about how to make a life for my baby. I promised myself I would not beg for their approval. I would work, fight, and survive. That small determination kept me going when everything else seemed lost. Every night, I imagined what it would be like to walk past my parents again, not as their disappointment, but as someone who had made it on her own. I didn't know how or when, but I swore I would find a way to show them that I was more than a mistake. And I did. Not because they changed, but because I learned to stand tall when no one believed in me. I learned that heartbreak could turn into strength, and shame could turn into pride. That's where my story begins, the moment my world fell apart, and I found the courage to keep moving forward, no matter how alone I felt. Eden's first cry changed everything. Holding her tiny, fragile body against my chest, I felt both awe and fear. She was mine, and mine alone, and suddenly the world seemed heavier. The little rental felt smaller than ever, and the bills on the counter whispered how impossible everything had become. I had no family to turn to, no safety net, and no path that seemed clear. Every decision fell on me, and the weight of it made me tremble at night. My only lifeline came in the form of Ivy, a waitress at the local diner. She wasn't family, but she had a heart the size of this town. When she offered me shifts under the table, I didn't hesitate. Those hours were grueling, long nights cleaning tables, serving coffee, and washing dishes, but they meant I could feed Eden and keep a roof over our heads. I learned to balance her sleeping body on my hip while taking orders or filling a tray with coffee cups, hoping she wouldn't wake up mid-shift. Every tiny yawn or stretch of her little arms reminded me why I had to keep going. The days blended into nights, and exhaustion became my constant companion. I had no time for friends, no energy for dreams, and no comfort from the people who were supposed to love me most. I remembered the opulence my parents lived in, their polished furniture, expensive vacations, and easy laughter. The contrast burned inside me. I wondered why blood could feel so cold. They had their lives untouched by the struggle that defined every moment of mine. It wasn't just resentment, it was disbelief that they could care so little. Calls to my father went unanswered. Each ring ended in silence, and each silence pushed a deeper ache into my chest. Letters from my mother came instead, folded neatly and sealed with perfection, but carrying only cruelty. One arrived that winter, telling me in careful handwriting that if I wanted any chance to return home, I needed to give the baby up. The words cut deeper than any slap or shout could. I held the paper against my chest, feeling the chill of rejection pierce through me. No warmth, no understanding, just rules, demands, and conditions. Ivy would bring coffee during my longest shifts and sneak little snacks into my pocket for. She didn't ask questions, didn't judge, and somehow made the endless nights bearable. Still, there were moments alone in the dim light of the diner's back room when I'd stare at the floor and wonder if I'd ever feel secure, if I'd ever laugh without fear, or if my baby would grow up in a world defined by struggle rather than comfort. Even when my arms ached from holding Eden, even when my eyes burned from sleepless nights, I refused to give up. Every small smile from her, every tiny gurgle, reminded me that she deserved more than despair. She deserved a mother who wouldn't crumble under the weight of a world that seemed designed to crush us. And so I worked. I endured. I survived. Alone, yes, but determined to prove that our little life, though humble, would still be filled with love, with warmth, and with resilience that my parents had refused to teach. It was past midnight when the diner's bell jingled, a sound I had learned to barely notice after so many long shifts. But that night, the sound froze me. I looked up, and my heart caught in my throat. There he was, Cass Hale. My Cass, the same man who had vanished months ago, leaving promises in his wake, promises of love, protection, and a life I had imagined with. He didn't look the same. The familiar worn denim and grease-stained hands were gone. In their place was a crisp suit that fit perfectly, shoes polished, and an aura I hadn't seen before. Behind him, two men in dark jackets lingered, watching the diner with quiet vigilance. Cass moved with calm authority, like someone used to having people follow his every step. My stomach twisted. I froze for a moment, unable to speak. Memories flooded in, long conversations under the stars, laughter that had once felt endless, his promises whispered in the... And then he was walking toward me, every step deliberate, measured. When he reached my counter, he didn't smile. He didn't apologize. He just looked at me, calm and confident, as though the months of absence were nothing. Cass! My voice wavered, catching somewhere between relief and anger. Where have you been? He leaned slightly against the counter, resting his hands casually, but his gaze held weight. Building what they said I'd never own, he said quietly. The words were simple, almost too calm, but they carried a sharp edge that made my chest tighten. I blinked, confused, trying to process what he meant. What? You just disappeared. You promised, my voice cracked. I swallowed back tears of frustration and longing. You promised you'd take care of me. I did what I had to, he replied, his tone even. I stayed away because I had to make sure I could. There was a pause, a weight of unspoken months hanging between us. His eyes, dark and steady, didn't apologize, but they demanded understanding. There was power in the way he stood, a presence I had never felt from him before, and it made me uneasy, impressed, and angry all at once. I looked past him at the two men who followed, and my mind raced. Who were they? Security? Associates? Why did he come back like this, commanding attention without a word? I felt a strange mix of relief and tension. Relief that he was here, that he hadn't abandoned me out of indifference, but tension because he had changed. So much had changed, and I didn't know if I could trust the man I once knew. Finally, I whispered, Cass, why now? He met my eyes, calm and unshaken, and said again, because I can. Because what I was told I could never have. I made it real. And now I'm here. Something in his words ignited a storm inside me. Anger at the months of uncertainty. Curiosity at what he had accomplished. And beneath it all, a cautious hope that maybe, just maybe, he was back for real this time. For the first time in months, the diner felt alive. Not because of the lights or the coffee, but because the past I thought I had lost had returned, standing before me, different, but impossible to ignore. Cass leaned back slightly, his calm presence filling the tiny diner space. I waited, heart racing, unsure if I even wanted the truth. Months of unanswered questions and silent nights pressed on me like a weight I couldn't shake. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady measure. I didn't leave because I wanted to, he said. I left because I had to. I blinked, unsure how to respond. My hands gripped the edge of the counter, nails digging in, while my mind tried to process what he meant. You had to? After everything, after you promised? He nodded slowly. Your father made it impossible for me to stay. He threatened to have me arrested if I ever set foot on their property again. I had no choice but to leave until I could build a life strong enough to protect both of you. I felt the air tighten in my chest. All the nights I had spent crying over his absence, all the moments I had questioned myself, suddenly made sense. But the anger I felt didn't go toward him. It shifted. Sharp, hot, focused anger toward my parents. My father, who had claimed to love me, had wielded the law like a weapon to push someone away who truly cared. My mother, with her perfection and rules, had watched silently while decisions were made that controlled me and my future. And what have you been doing all this time? I asked cautiously, though my curiosity burned. Cass's expression didn't change, but his eyes carried a quiet pride. I built a logistics company. Contracts with major corporations, fleets, warehouses. Everything your father laughed at. He called it a dream for fools. I wanted to prove him wrong. I wanted to make sure that when I returned, I could provide stability. Not just for me, but for you and Eden. I stared at him, disbelief mixing with awe. He had transformed from the man I knew into someone unstoppable, someone capable of bending the impossible into reality. My chest tightened, not because of what he had done, but because of what my parents had forced him to become. They hadn't just driven him away. They had tried to manipulate my life, to dictate the choices I could make, to strip me of any hope. You stayed away all this time to protect me? I whispered, my voice catching. Yes, he said simply, because I couldn't risk returning until I could offer more than promises, until I could make sure you and Eden were safe, no matter what they tried next. I exhaled, the tension in my body loosening slightly, though fury still burned beneath my skin. Not toward Cass, who had shown loyalty and foresight, but toward my parents, whose control over my life had been absolute and suffocating. They had underestimated me, underestimated him, underestimated the lengths we would go to survive. For the first time in months, I felt clarity. My heartbreak and anger no longer tangled in confusion about Cass's absence. They were aimed where they belonged, at the people who had tried to limit my life, dictate my choices, and shame me for daring to exist outside their expectations. Cass reached out, lightly touching my hand, and I felt the calm steadiness of someone who had fought to make things right. We're past that now, he said quietly. I'm here, and we'll figure out the rest together. I nodded, eyes brimming with tears I refused to shed fully. The truth had surfaced, and with it came a bitter clarity. My rage no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the people who had tried to control everything I loved. And for the first time, I felt ready to face them, armed not with fear, but with knowledge, strength, and unwavering determination. I never thought I would set foot near my parents' house again, but Cass insisted this was necessary. Not to apologize, not to reconcile, but to finally face the people who had tried to break me. My stomach twisted as we drove up the long, winding driveway. The mansion looked even colder than I remembered, its manicured lawns and shining windows reflecting the life I had been denied. Then I saw them, neighbors peeking from behind hedges, mouths open, eyes wide. And there it was, the line of black SUVs that rolled onto the driveway, sleek and imposing, every inch a statement. Cass stepped out first, tall and composed, his presence demanding attention. He looked nothing like the man they had dismissed as a nobody. The air seemed to shift. Even the birds fell silent, as if sensing a storm. My father appeared at the front door, his chest puffed out, hands clenched at his sides. Wes Cole, proud and unyielding, had always been the law in our house. But as Cass walked closer, his eyes met my father's, steady and unflinching, and something flickered, hesitation, doubt, maybe fear. Pride doesn't hold up well against undeniable success. Raina, my father began, his voice strained but attempting authority. What is the meaning of this? I stayed quiet, letting Cass speak. His words were calm, measured, and sharp enough to cut through years of arrogance. I'm here because the truth needs to be seen. You pushed her away, forced her into a life of struggle, and watched while she barely survived. And for what? Your comforts? Your pride? She raised her child with nothing from you while you enjoyed every luxury you could afford. I felt a strange mix of vindication and discomfort hearing the words aloud, but it was right. Cass's voice didn't waver. He didn't yell or threaten. He simply exposed their hypocrisy with precision. My mother appeared at his words, her hands clutching her apron at her hips, lips pressed thin. The mask of control she always wore began to falter. I saw it. Hesitation, shame, a flicker of guilt that she had hidden behind perfection. Her eyes met mine for a moment, and I saw the acknowledgement of wrong, even if she couldn't speak it aloud. Wes tried to regain command, stepping forward, voice booming. You think money changes everything? You're blind if you think you can come here and judge us. Cass didn't move. He didn't shout. He simply smiled faintly, an unshakable calm radiating from him. I'm not here to judge. I'm here to show her what she endured, and to make sure it's clear who was responsible for her hardship. You can't hide behind status or wealth anymore. The truth doesn't bend for anyone. Neighbors peeked from windows and driveway, whispers floating in the crisp air. I felt their eyes on me, but I didn't flinch. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt seen not by Cass, not even by the world, but by myself. The power my parents had tried to steal from me, the authority to determine my worth, was gone. My mother's hands trembled slightly. My father's jaw tightened, and I realized something profound. Their control over me had ended. I didn't need to fight. I didn't need to beg. The truth had arrived in black SUVs, and with it came the closure I had been denied for so long. Cass stepped back, letting me take the moment in silence. For once, I wasn't just their daughter. I was a woman who had endured, survived, and now faced them without fear. And in that quiet confrontation, everything shifted. A week passed after the confrontation, and I had barely thought about calling my parents. Then the phone rang, and I saw my mother's name on the screen. Hesitation knotted my stomach, but I answered. Raina, her voice trembled, fragile and unfamiliar. Please come to dinner. Just to talk. We need to make things right. I hung up and turned to Cass, who had been quietly watching. He raised an eyebrow, a silent warning clear in his gaze. Don't go, he said softly. It's a trap. They want control, not conversation. I shook my head, a cold determination settling over me. I'm not going for forgiveness. I'm going to show them what they lost, what they nearly destroyed. That evening, I stepped into the dining room of the Cole estate, carrying the calm I had cultivated over months of struggle. The room smelled faintly of expensive candles, and the silverware gleamed under chandelier light. My parents' smiles were carefully painted on, too perfect to be genuine. I took my seat across from them, Eden quietly in her stroller beside me. Wes cleared his throat, trying to assert his usual authority. Raina, let's discuss how we can move forward. We, his words faltered, betraying the tension behind his composed facade. Marla leaned slightly forward, voice soft, fragile, but still rehearsed. We just want to understand, Raina, to find some middle ground. I let them talk for a few minutes, nodding only slightly, listening as their polite words hung empty in the air. And then my father, his pride still attempting dominance, reached for a checkbook. Here, he said, pushing it toward me. Take this. Consider it a fresh start. Move on, stay quiet, and everything can go back to normal. I let my eyes drift over the table, scanning their faces. Marla's eyes flickered, her lips tightening, and I could see Wes's jaw clench behind his forced composure. I placed my hand flat on the table, keeping my voice calm but steady. I don't need money, and I won't be silent. There was a pause. Their disbelief was palpable, their scripted evening cracking. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of months of planning and patience settle into the room. Cass has already purchased the mortgage to this house, I said, letting each word land deliberately. For a moment, silence swallowed the table. My parents stared at me, eyes wide, mouths opening and closing without sound. Their luxury, their control, their authority, it all faltered in an instant. The room felt smaller, charged with a tension they couldn't command. I looked at them steadily, letting the truth hang in the air. You taught me nothing about love or loyalty, I said, but you taught me resilience. And now, the consequences of your actions are clear. Marla's hands trembled over the tablecloth, and Wes's face darkened with a mixture of anger and shock. The checkbook remained untouched, the empty offer meaningless in the wake of what I had revealed. Eden stirred in her stroller, and I smiled softly, the smallest glimmer of satisfaction warming me. My parents' wealth and appearances meant nothing here. The control they had once wielded over me was gone, and nothing they could offer would change that. That night, I left the dinner with a sense of calm power. I hadn't screamed, I hadn't yelled. I had simply shown them the reality they had ignored for too long. And in that quiet victory, I felt the first true freedom I had known in years. The tension at the table finally snapped. Wes slammed his fist lightly against the polished surface, startling even the silverware. You're ungrateful, he shouted, his face red, veins standing out in his neck. Corrupted by that man. You've forgotten everything we did for you. I took a slow breath, feeling every word settle into my chest like fire. For so long, I had held back, swallowed the pain, and walked carefully around their pride. But now I refused to shrink. My voice was calm, steady, and unwavering as I looked directly at him. You call me ungrateful? I began, my hands resting lightly on the table. You call me corrupted? Do you know what it's like to be judged for daring to live your own life? To be made small because your choices didn't fit the image you want. Wes's eyes narrowed, the veins in his forehead pulsing as he opened his mouth to argue. But I didn't stop. You taught me fear, not love. You measured my worth by appearances, by convenience, by how I reflected on you, not how I felt inside. For years, I carried shame you placed on me, while pretending I could meet impossible standards. And all the while, you ignored the person I was becoming, alone, yes, but stronger than you imagined. Marla's hands gripped the edge of her chair, her lips pressed tight, but her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She wanted to intervene, to calm the storm, but I continued, voice unwavering. Eden will not grow up thinking she has to shrink to please anyone, I said, a fierce clarity guiding my words. She will know truth. She will know what courage looks like. She will know love comes without conditions. And she will grow up safe from the same suffocating control that trapped me for years. The room felt heavier with every word. Cass sat beside me, silent, his presence steady and unshakable. He didn't need to speak. His calm authority contrasted sharply with my father's rage. It was a silent declaration that I was no longer alone, that we were unbreakable together. Wes's fists fell to his lap, jaw tight, eyes flicking between my face and Cass's quiet strength. Anger still burned in him, but it lacked the control it once had over me. He opened his mouth, then closed it, unable to reclaim the dominance he had wielded for so long. Marla's shoulders trembled. Tears slipped down her cheeks as the facade she had maintained for decades crumbled. She reached out as if to touch me, but I didn't flinch or retreat. This wasn't about mercy or reconciliation. It was about truth, and I refused to back down. I took a moment to glance at Eden, who watched us from her stroller, wide-eyed but calm. My daughter was the center of this room, the reason I stood firmly in the storm. Everything I had endured, every night of exhaustion and doubt, had led to this moment of clarity. "You wanted to break me," I said softly, my voice carrying both pain and resolve. "You almost did. But I am here. I am strong. And Eden will grow up knowing that she belongs to herself first, not to anyone else's expectations." Cass placed a protective hand lightly over mine, a quiet anchor. Marla's tears fell freely, but I didn't soften. I had finally taken my ground, and nothing they said or did could shake the certainty that had taken root in me. At that moment, the past's weight lifted slightly, and for the first time, I felt the power of standing unafraid, fully seen, and wholly determined. Weeks after the confrontation, Cass finally brought me to a quiet office downtown. The building was unassuming, but inside, the polished floors and neat stacks of files carried a sense of authority that made my pulse quicken. He motioned for me to sit, and I did, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "I have something to show you," he said, sliding a thick folder across the table. The edges of the documents peeked out, crisp and official. I lifted the top sheet and froze. The letterhead bore my family's name, Cole Enterprises. My eyes widened as I scanned the first page, realizing the company I had once admired, resented, and feared was teetering on the edge of collapse. Cass didn't speak immediately. He let me absorb the information, his calm presence filling the room like an anchor. I flipped through the documents, reading balance sheets and contracts, each page revealing the depth of financial instability that had remained hidden behind my parents' facade of control and wealth. Their empire, which had always felt untouchable, was crumbling quietly, buried under debt and mismanagement. Why are you showing me this?" I finally asked, voice low but steady. My mind raced, imagining what this meant for the people who had tried to control me for years. Cass leaned back, hands folded, eyes fixed on me. "I've been planning this for a long time," he said, almost casually. "Not out of anger, not to punish them, but to give justice a chance to balance itself. They tried to ruin your life, and now you have the power to decide what happens next." I looked up at him, a mixture of awe and disbelief in my eye. For months, I had assumed revenge meant something loud, dramatic, something that would humiliate them in front of everyone. But this quiet, calculated final was far more powerful. The weight of choice rested entirely on me. Cass slid the folder closer. "Everything is here, the contracts, the ownership transfer, and the details of the business. It's all yours to decide." My fingers trembled as I held the papers, feeling a strange calm wash over me. I traced the company name with my thumb, the letters of Cole Enterprises, no longer symbols of oppression or shame. Now they represented closure, proof that the power they once wielded over me could be dismantled without a single shout or confrontation. "You mean I can just decide what happened?" I asked, almost whispering. "Yes," Cass replied. "You have the choice. You can restore it, sell it, or let it dissolve. The decision is yours alone." I leaned back, taking a deep breath. For the first time, I felt nothing but clarity. I had carried so much anger, so many sleepless nights, but now, holding these documents, I realized closure didn't need theatrics or vengeance. It was simply about reclaiming control over what had once been used to hurt me. I closed the folder and looked at Cass. "Then I think we let it go. I'll handle it my way. Fair, simple, and final." He nodded, a faint smile on his lips, and I felt the first real sense of freedom in years. My family's name was on the paper, but it no longer had the power to bind me. The empire they tried to control me with was gone, and so was the weight of resentment. For the first time, I felt at peace. Justice had arrived not with chaos or noise, but with quiet strength, and the knowledge that I, and only I, held the final word. After days of careful thought, I made my decision. I wasn't going to destroy my parents, even though every instinct screamed at me to. Their mistakes had shaped my life, yes, but vengeance wasn't the end I wanted. I sold the business quietly, keeping a portion for myself. It wasn't about wealth or power anymore. It was about using what I had gained to create something meaningful. With my share, I founded a small but growing organization dedicated to supporting single mothers. I wanted women like me, women who had been left alone, judged, and underestimated, to know they weren't powerless. Every day, I worked on programs, mentorships, and resources, building opportunities where there had once been nothing. The satisfaction was quiet but profound, the kind that fills the heart rather than inflates the ego. Word of my efforts and the transformation of the company eventually reached the local newspaper. One crisp morning, I found a copy on my desk. The front page carried a photo of me, smiling softly but confidently, Eden clutched in my arms. The headline celebrated the foundation and the growth it had sparked in the community. My parents' name was mentioned only in passing, as part of the history I had inherited but refused to let define me. I held the paper in my hands, feeling a surge of pride that had nothing to do with money or status. This was proof that I had created my own path, one shaped by perseverance, compassion, and a refusal to be controlled. I didn't need approval, nor did I crave acknowledgement from the people who had tried to diminish me. Not long after, Marla appeared at my office. She looked different, her carefully arranged hair slightly messy, her posture hesitant. Tears lined her cheeks, and her voice shook as she called my name. I watched her from behind my desk, calm and resolute. "Irena, please," she said. "Can we talk?" I didn't know. I remained silent. The years of neglect, manipulation, and coldness had created a barrier I was no longer willing to breach. My life was full, and Eden was safe. No apology, no pleading could change that. She lingered for a moment, then left, leaving the glass doors swinging softly behind her. I didn't call back, and I didn't dwell. My focus was on the present and the future, the work I was doing, the lives I was touching, the family I had created with Eden, and those who truly cared. For the first time, I felt untouchable, not in arrogance, but in quiet confidence. I had survived betrayal, abandonment, and judgment, and I had emerged stronger and wiser. The power my parents had once wielded over me was gone, replaced with the authority I had claimed for myself. Eden laughed as she played in my office, tugging at papers and giggling without a care. I watched her, smiling genuinely, feeling the joy of a life fully lived. Each moment of her happiness reminded me why I had endured everything, why I had refused to bow, and why I had chosen to build rather than destroy. The city around me continued its rush, but in that small space, filled with sunlight and laughter, I felt complete. The past could not reach me here. I had taken the pain, the lessons, and the losses, and turned them into something lasting. And so life went on, steady, purposeful, and free. I was no longer defined by my parents' mistakes. I was defined by my strength, my choices, and the legacy I was building for Eden and countless others who deserved a chance to rise. The sun was low in the sky, painting the backyard with golden light as Eden ran across the grass, her laughter ringing clear and pure. She stopped to chase a butterfly, arms outstretched, spinning in joy, completely free. I leaned against the porch railing, watching her, a smile I hadn't felt in years spreading slowly across my face. Cass was nearby, leaning casually against the fence. He tilted his head, watching Eden with a quiet amusement. "You know," he said with a teasing grin, "maybe we went overboard with this yard. She could host a soccer league in here." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "I think she likes it," I replied, the sound foreign to my own ears but comforting nonetheless. There was no tension in this space, no weight of judgment, no reminder of the lives we had escaped. Just Eden, just us, and a sense of peace I had never thought possible. For so long, I had carried the scars of betrayal and abandonment. I had measured my days by hardship and fear, by the coldness of people who should have loved me unconditionally. But now, sitting in the warmth of the afternoon, I realized something profound. I didn't owe anyone forgiveness. I didn't owe them explanations or reconciliation. My life had grown beyond their reach, and that in itself was victory. Every choice I had made, the work, the foundation, the careful steps to reclaim my life, had led me here. My revenge hadn't been loud or vengeful. It had been subtle, unspoken, and complete. It wasn't about confrontation, shame, or humiliation. It was about creating a life they could never touch, a life richer than they had ever imagined. I watched Eden collapse into the grass, giggling, and Cass crouched to join her, gently tossing her into the air. Their joy was effortless, unscripted, and it reminded me that the best victories were not public or noisy. They were lived quietly, fully, and without apology. The sound of an engine broke the peaceful rhythm. I glanced up and saw a black SUV pulling into the driveway. My heart skipped, briefly tensing, but then I recognized the familiar shape. It wasn't a convoy this time. It wasn't a show or a display. It was simple, private, and right. Cass stepped back from Eden, brushing grass off his hands, and gave me a wink. The SUV came to a slow stop, and he opened the door with a casual grace. When he walked up to me, there was no grandeur, no announcement, just home. I felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders. The past, with all its betrayals and battles, could not touch me anymore. I had fought, endured, and ultimately had nothing left to prove to anyone except myself. The life I had built, Eden, our home, our quiet happiness, was victory enough. I reached for Cass's hand, and he took it without hesitation. We stood together, watching Eden chase a butterfly again, the sunlight turning her hair to gold. I laughed, a full, unguarded sound, because I was free. Free from expectation, free from judgment, free from anyone who had tried to control my life. And in that simple moment, I understood that the quietest revenge is the most complete. You don't need to yell, threaten, or humiliate. You just need to live, and live better than they could ever imagine. The yard was ours. The air was ours. And for the first time in my life, so was the peace I had earned. Do you think I did the right thing by walking away from my family, or should I have given them another chance? I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. If you want more stories like this, subscribe and hit the bell.